We are live. Welcome back to the 3D Printing Leadership Forum series. We are planning to continue these conversations and to bring on a variety of incredible guests every month. So for now, welcome back with your hosts, Avi Reichental and myself. I'm Sarah Goehrke, the Senior Director of Strategic Communications and Ecosystems at Nexa 3D, as well as a board director and the head of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Women in 3D Printing. Avi, of course, is a man who needs no introduction, but I'm going to ask him to make one anyway. Avi, would you please say hi?
I would love to say hi. Hi, Sarah. Hi, everybody. It's really good to have you here again. I'm Avi Reichental. I am the co-founder, CEO, and chairman of Nexa 3D. Uh, and I'm very active in other philanthropic and venture type activities. But today, we're here in our Nexa capacity, and we're here to talk sustainability.
That's right. So, sustainability, big topic, big word, big thoughts. And a lot of it's kind of gotten buzzy. Sustainability has turned into quite a buzzword when it comes to additive manufacturing today. And, unfortunately, there are too many current industry initiatives that appear to target a more sustainable approach to production that are really just kind of feel good or, dare we say, greenwashing. So let's talk about it. Let's just get real about this. How do we overcome this next speed bump in industry growth and really actualize the promises of additive manufacturing? So let's start with those promises. The claims are that 3D printing is inherently more sustainable. There's less material waste, there can be a lower carbon footprint because things don't have to ship. You've got on demand, you've got localized production. This all sounds great. But there are footnotes. There are issues. Every one of those claims kind of has its own thing to look at. So those can be where greenwashing comes in. And let's start with just what that means. What do we mean when we say greenwashing? Avi, how would you define that term?
Well, it's a great question, Sarah. I looked in Webster and I couldn't find a definition that would fit the bill. So I'll just riff here and see if I can convince you that I'm onto something really important. So, to me, greenwashing is talking about something that you don't have any intention of doing. It has to do with being opportunistic. So, for instance, the time is good now to talk about sustainable initiatives because we're totally preoccupied with global warming. We've been through several unprecedented seasons, as to the impact of global warming. Uh, Put that together with everything that's happening in supply chain because of COVID, and you're now at the intersection of hype and opportunity. And I think that for many companies, they also tend to follow the money. And investors right now want to invest in companies, that make sustainability and decarbonizing the planet a priority. Customers want to do business with companies that claim that they have significant sustainability initiatives. And even more importantly, all of our internal stakeholders, i.e., our fellow teammates, also want to hang out with people that care about the environment. So when timing and opportunity creates this kind of convenience, we have a risk of greenwashing, which means we're not really intentional, we're not really walking the talk, and we're not putting any data or metrics behind it. So, I kind of took the long way around the barn, but hopefully I made this relatable. That's kind of how I think about greenwashing.
No, I think that's an important distinction because greenwashing is something you can't really see in the dictionary. It's still open to interpretation and different definitions. So that's pretty interesting, isn't it, as something that's impacting us, but we can't really put an easy finger on or a quick dictionary definition and say that's the problem. So the problem is that we can't put our finger on it, right? So let's look beyond that.
Which kind of makes it really wide open to people hijacking it to serve their agenda. And I think all of us are at risk of being seduced by this opportunity. So it's really, really important to kind of reflect on, how do you make sure that when we start talking about it, the insides match the outsides.
Let's get into that one, Avi. The insides matching the outsides. So a lot of times the outside is that, we're 3D printing, we're sustainable, but there's this kind of missing piece to that puzzle, right? And that's where the internal action takes place. Actionability. What does that mean? What should sustainability mean? How can we move beyond greenwashing? How can we get beyond a company saying carbon reduction and get it into the DNA of a company and get beyond buzzwords? What does action mean, basically, when it comes to sustainability?
Well, I think that action, first and foremost, means that we have an opportunity here and a responsibility to educate our team about sustainability and how sustainability starts with design, with applying circular design principles into everything that we do, and then with actually validation and confirmation via measurements, metrics, KPIs. For instance, there is a lot of talk about how 3D printing can reduce carbon footprint because you can make manufacturing hyper-local, you can eliminate all the transport emissions, but we don't have a way today to calculate the per part impact of making a decision like this. So it amounts to a very interesting theory, but we don't have any vehicle today, any means to reduce it into practice. There is a lot of discussion around the fact that the premise or that inherent in 3D printing is the opportunity to topology optimize the geometry, to put only the amount of material that you really, really need to meet all of your static and dynamic load conditions, and in the process, eliminate material. If it's lightweighted, it will ship cheaper, it will take less energy to make, there'll be less material to recycle or downcycle down the road. Those are interesting theories, but the action would come from actually educating designers and engineers to think like this and give them the instant feedback by way of tools so that they will understand the cause and effect of making circular design centric decisions.
Okay, so that's another big word that I want to talk about, Avi, is circular design, circular economy. How would you define that? You're my dictionary today.
Well, that's these are big shoes to fill since you're the wordsmith, in between us. But I think that the two are, at least in my mind, completely related in the sense that for one to bring a product into a circular economy, which means it has a beginning of life, but it never really has an end of life because it gets recycled or upcycled or downcycled, and you start with that intention up front and you think like that, that's when you then get to apply what I loosely term circular design principles so that you can create a circular economy around the product. So, for instance, we're nearing the introduction of our awesome Zip 3D printer at Nexa 3D. You're very involved with it, Sarah, and enormously helpful. And you know that early on, when we assembled the team to start thinking about what does Zip mean to us, we made some unconventional choices. For instance, we decided to design and fabricate the enclosure from aluminum billet. We did it for many functional reasons, but substantially, the main influencer here was that aluminum is the most recycled material in the wild. Some 97% of all aluminum gets recycled again and again and again. So, notwithstanding the fact that it would potentially increase the cost of goods and that you don't see 3D printers made out of aluminum billet enclosures in the wild today, we opted to do it solely because it fit into our definition of applying circular design principles into something that we design. Of course, for any product designer or engineer, thinking along those lines, what material do I select? What's going to happen to that material down the road? What's going to be the impact on the weight, not just on the functionality? What will happen at the end of life to that component or material is how one begins to kind of walk the talk, because it's not just about you and I doing it and all of our Nexers. It's about working with communities of like-minded people, learning from and with each other, teaching, discovering how to do this well. And if we only move the way that we design 1 grain of sand every day, the impact on sustainability, the impact on the planet is going to be huge, even if we just move it 1 grain of sand.
I think that's just really undervalued, what each grain of sand can do, until we look at how these grains of sand form a beach, and that beach forms the geography where, our sandbox, as you will, our playground where we all are. So let's talk about how we can bring those grains of sand together. We joined the Additive Manufacturer Green Trade Association last year. And a few rounds of membership growth later, there are now more than 40 members of the AMGTA globally. So how do organizations like the AMGTA and other, industry-wide consortia really, how can those move the needle? Avi, you and I have talked a lot kind of within the realm of Nexa about what that means for us, why we wanted to become a participating member in this organization. We've talked a lot with the executive director, Sherry Handel. We've talked with her team, and we've been, in touch with a lot of our fellow members. But what would you say kind of big picture is our hope? How can organizations like this and groups of these grains of sand, how can that lead to impact?
In a few important ways, and it will take the entire organization to align around this, embrace it, and act on it. The first is that we can establish some information and educational curricula here, so that we can take these concepts like how do I apply circular design principles into my everyday design and into my manufacturing? What does that look like? Let's look at some case studies. Let's document them, and let's look at the impact. That's, I think, one way. So education is a big way. Another is coming together and maybe developing meaningful tools that the industry as a whole can embrace, like, for instance, an emission calculator that could be meaningful to designers and engineers and companies that manufacture products. A third way is to think about an opportunity here to crowdsource solutions and kind of do the antithesis of what we do when we try to garner a competitive advantage out of some discovery or IP. Maybe there are opportunities here for AMGTA to actually be the convener of crowdsourcing impactful ideas as to how additive manufacturing can drive sustainability. Let me give you just, off the top of my head, a couple of examples. To the extent that we could learn how to better recover and recycle resin that gets trapped between printing a green part and the washing cycle during the post-processing, how amazing would it be if not only we learned how to do it well, because we can reduce a lot of waste out of the waste stream, improve efficiency, improve yields, get more out of the initial material, which means we don't put energy into creating more material. And how amazing would it be if we shared a best practice like this within an organization like this and kind of crowdsourced it and opened it as an open platform? And I can go on, right? I mean, support reduction and lightweighting techniques. It's kind of counterintuitive because most companies want to like keep all this know-how as IP, even when it's not a patent. And I'm kind of suggesting that to get to convincing scale and move the needle, to get all these grains of sands to form a beachhead here, we need to think in terms of crowdsourcing and openness.
I'm completely aligned on that. And I think, many people joining us today are thinking about that too. One grain of sand is neat. Under a microscope, it's beautiful, but it's not going to, cause a sandstorm. That's a little bit of a violent image, but, it's not going to have that impact that the entire beach could. So partnerships are really the way forward, and especially while additive manufacturing is so young and so early on this journey of adoption, looking beyond that IP and that capitalist drive to just be the best performer with the best practices, all of that, developing, industry-wide best practices, working together toward common goals. What's the point of an additive manufacturing industry if we don't act like an industry with best practices, with formalized things, with the things that really move the needle when it comes to adoption, toward making an impact, toward hitting that, multi-trillion-dollar overall manufacturing industry? We can have all the impact we want, within the Nexa 3D HQ in Ventura, but what is that doing in Taiwan? How is that helping Ukraine? How is that, working in South America? Until every installation and all of the companies work together. I think that's why we've been talking to a lot of potential partners recently and looking to see how we can instigate action and collaborate on that. So when we talk about what partnerships could do, how do we see these things coming together? We're saying it takes a community. We're saying it takes all of this, but then you get a community, you get the like-minded people. Avi, then what?
Well, then you convince them and you begin to embrace some actions and deliverables that would allow for some uniformity of standards, that would allow for acceptance of certain measurements like an emission calculator on a geometry that would create, if you will, the approved methods and workflows that we can then teach and embed into our everyday actions. And in return, we can then have a way to badge or validate or give a real circular economy mark to a product because it meets or exceeds standards. And as an industry, what everybody in additive manufacturing is yearning for, I mean, the reason that all of us are here is really to digitize supply chain and manufacturing sustainably. I mean, that you know, Sarah, that for Nexa, that's our North Star, right? Digitizing supply chain sustainably. But I think it could be true, either you call it responsible manufacturing or you call it digitizing supply chain sustainably or you call it something else. I think all of us want the same thing. The biggest opportunity for all of us is not in the current activities that most of us do. It's more in taking it to the next level in a design life cycle, which is volume manufacturing. So it's truly an opportunity for all of us to step up, grow up, act like a mature industry, harness the collective wisdom, develop the standards and the measurements and the badges, educate the world, and make it so it's attractive and sustainably impactful for companies to adapt digital manufacturing, additive manufacturing with confidence, and know that when they do it, they're not only going to get beautifully made, highly functional products, but they'll have a huge and measurable impact on the environment.
I think measurable impact is really an undervalued key right there. For companies to really have that together, you need to be able to measure it. So that's where education, where best practices, where working together come in. You have to establish and define KPIs, specifically laid out goals, have those emissions calculators, create corporate sustainability reports that dig into those. Look at some of the reports that the AMGTA has started to back with full product life cycle examination. And all of those things are measured. And so when we look at those, that I think that's where we get beyond that hump of greenwashing, because it's not just like, oh, this looks nice. Look, we packaged in post-consumer cardboard and we have a recycling bin outside our office. That's nice. That's maybe it makes you feel better, and it's not no impact, but it's not what's going to actually happen when it's built into the DNA of a company.
No, absolutely, sir. I mean, look, I don't want us to minimize the small steps, the baby steps that a lot of companies do just to build their muscles, right? I mean, recycling in the workplace and thinking about landfill and disposal and repurposing, all very important, but we have to go well beyond that if we really want to impact the world, because those activities have been around for decades. We're now talking about changing the way that we create and manufacture products. That's a bigger idea. So it looks like we lost Sarah. In so what I will do in the meantime is perhaps answer some of your questions. So I see that Jake was commenting that the starting point may be to embed life cycle analysis, and I think that that is really a good point here, in the sense that the more that we can look at it, the better we'll understand product life cycles. Hi, Sarah. I was just trying to keep the conversation going after both of us got kicked off, and it's a very humbling experience. A, understanding that we're at the mercy of connectivity, and B, getting to a point where I was just in dead silence, realizing that, oh my God, the show is on and the show goes on. So I better
Show
say
must go
something.
on, Avi.
Yeah.
Even when the internet throws one of those big vaudeville hooks to pull one of us off stage quickly.
Yeah. So I was starting to kind of answer Jake Walker's comment, and I see that he already thanked me. So thank you, Jake, for hanging in there. And I'm going to turn it back to Sarah because she's a much better moderator than I am.
Well, we're back. Sorry about that. I'm back. Avi's, let's be real, he's great at keeping all of these things going, and so are you. So we're glad, Jake and everyone else in the chat, that you've been bearing with us. And you know what? We are at about the point in the conversation where we did want to turn over to Q&A. So I welcome, more thoughts, more questions, more comments. What else do you want to know about? What is it about additive manufacturing and sustainability that is something that's really impacting where you are? Okay, we've got putting recycling icons with polymer types on AM parts could be a starting point. I think understanding the recycling stream for every material we work with is a huge area to look into, and having an understanding from manufacturers of both materials and the systems that use them about how to then recycle them. Not every area can recycle every material that's theoretically recyclable. Avi, what are your thoughts on that aspect?
Well, I think that doing something like this is, I would characterize as table stakes. I mean, we need to do it, and we need to understand that not every material will immediately or readily accept recycled content. And in some instances, it might, take time for this to become economically viable. And like it or not, companies are still driven by their bottom line. And so to make something like this viable, we will also need to help companies redefine their bottom line, even if we got past the chemistry and the process. But it's certainly an important pursuit, and many other industries, like, for instance, the packaging industry, the food industry, have done things like this, and to a certain extent have done them successfully over a few decades. There are many other areas that we can immediately work on, like understanding the importance of lightweighting or weight reduction impact on product design and manufacturing, understanding the potency and the power of combining many parts into a single assembly, and foregoing many of the intermediate activities, all of which consume energy, not just in the manufacturing, but also in the transportation, the assembly, and the inventory complexity that comes with it. And it all translates at the end of the day to energy and costs. So there are many ways, and I think it's a legitimate point. Like, how do you identify all these opportunities? How do you prioritize them? And how then you get all decks on hand to begin to help codify them and distill them and synthesize them into meaningful and impactful actions.
That's huge. I think I can also show comments on the screen. So we've got one here from Jeremy saying, are there any major initiatives by OEMs to develop logistical and or partnership models for reclaiming and recycling materials? So that kind of does touch on what you were just bringing up.
So I can certainly tell Jeremy that at Nexa, as we speak now, we're working on reclaiming and recycling materials in two different ways, and again, in the spirit of openness and kind of unleashing the knowledge in our heads and within the four walls of our headquarters. We're looking both at how can we reclaim resin in that step between finishing to print a green photoplastic or a green photopolymer and washing it. And as a second step, we just installed a reclaimer that can actually take the washing detergent and clean it and scrub it so that we could reuse it, because as you know, over time, whatever you use, IPA or another detergent, it gets contaminated and degrade to a level in which you have to dispose of it. And we kind of said, no, it's no longer acceptable to us to dispose of a material like this. Let's figure out how we can reclaim it. And in success, after we kind of prove it, nail it, and scale it within the four walls of our next factory, I promise you that we'll make it available to everybody.
That kind of availability will be huge, and it's a big thing. And while we're on that one, Chuck would like more details on the wash recycler. So on the to-do list, Chuck.
Absolutely. I'm happy to get you involved, Chuck, and share with you what we know.
And a big drive for us at Nexa 3D is definitely working with the industry, if we haven't been clear about that. So please, anyone who's joining us today or watching the recording later, please reach out to me or Avi, and we're happy to see where conversations can lead. But while we're still in this one, we've got a lengthy message here that doesn't all fit on the screen about a design for decay approach for 3D printed materials. So looking at a selection of materials that will biodegrade without needing to be composted. And that will, of course, impact the durability, resilience, and other material and mechanical properties of that. The rest of the comment says we can't trust recycling since there is leakage and many materials don't get reprocessed. LCAs won't capture leakage like this with this. So that's, certainly another aspect of conversation that's been coming to light.
Yeah, so this is first, thank you for the comment. I think this is one of those holy grails that you wish that we can uncover. I have read a few white papers on this topic, and there might be one or two early stage companies that actually is thinking along those lines. I have yet to see feedstock that could be used at industrial scale, but I think it's a well worth it pursuit, and we should get more formulators and innovators to think along those lines, because sooner or later, that's something that hopefully chemistry can deliver.
And I will say it's been heartening to see many of the leading material suppliers in our industry, including most of, if not all of our material partners, have a huge focus on sustainability with reports published annually, at least, as well as visible sustainability statements on their websites that dig into their approaches and commitments. So certainly that comes from every level of these partnerships and all of these aspects. And I'm also loving all of the comments coming in. We're trying to keep up with them. So keep them coming. Give us the challenge. So we've got another comment about rethinking design for additive manufacturing to capture this as a best practice. But there are other elephants in the room. The one I wonder about is energy/carbon costs to restructure materials to be suitable for a particular AM process, particularly powder bed technologies. Not sure if we can design our way out of this one.
No, this is, I think, this particular elephant is the one that I was trying to address, but talking about coming up with meaningful emission calculators, because not every material set and not every print engine that is today available for additive manufacturing is necessarily energy efficient or meets the criteria of sustainability. So I think as we learn from and with each other and look with transparency under the hood of what kind of printing technologies we have to offer today, we need to be transparent about which ones have a very call it sustainably positive impact and which ones don't. And then we have to look at the ones that could positively impact and ask ourselves, how can we make them better and how can we educate around DFMA and DFAM and topology optimization tools, etc. And equally, the ones that have more of a negative impact, what can be done to improve those, either on the material side, the energy side, or a combination thereof.
Definitely. And the questions keep rolling in, so I'm just going to keep rolling them at you, Avi. When we look at wider adoption, this question really boils down to accessibility. Looking at decentralized mass production as it begins to really scale up, and smaller enterprises in particular may not always have the financial wherewithal for the heavy user licenses for some of the what we'd like to see as industry standard software or materials or hardware. So how can we look at this? I think this does tie into what we were talking about with grains of sand forming a beach and hiding things behind IP or a ton of paywalls, makes accessibility very difficult to actually make impactful change. So how do you see this one?
No, for sure, and I have kind of a few comments on this. The first one is that in full disclosure, I'm also involved with a company called Parameters, and Parameters has very powerful topology optimization and generative design capabilities that you all might want to try and check out, and perhaps you can work something more democratized with Parameters. I don't want to speak for them, but I wanted to say that that's available. Autodesk has some very good generative design tools that perhaps could also be accessed in a way that's more economical. And I'm positive that if you guys talk with NTOP, you might be able to influence their thinking about how they might democratize access to these tools. And I'm sure that there are other ways. Happy to take conversations like this offline and see how we could potentially facilitate something.
I think democratization is a word we use a lot in this industry, and it's another one of those sort of wibbly definitions, shall we say, because everyone means something different. And, I know we worked to define that ourselves as well when we introduced the zip at FormNext this past year, because that is a way of democratizing, our LSPC technology that's been available in these huge industrial printers, and now it's going to the desktop. So that is one way of democratizing and looking at different entry points, levels, finding the best fit product for your situation. It might not always be an industrial one. It might be a desktop one or just a different level as you kind of ramp up and look for the, right fit for any given workflow. I think that would be something in there. So we can also look at this question. Going back into that recycling logos on materials, some of those recycling logos do aggregate several polymers into a single category. So if we look at the actual rich diversity of materials, we do need to break out what that means for actual recyclability for the end product made from them.
I think that it's a spot on comment, and I agree with it. And that's another thing that perhaps an organization like AMGTA can be a good convener and facilitator, because if we have some generally accepted standards on how to do something like this, then all of us can conform.
Definitely. And I think that really does sum up a lot of what we've been discussing here today. And yep, there's definitely support for that, that continues to come in. So, everyone from this industry we'd like this to be a big call that there is a hunger for this right now. And, Avi, we named today's discussion, "The Time Is Now" for sustainability, because when we were discussing upcoming topics for these monthly sessions, you brought up the point that the best time to have a conversation about sustainability is always yesterday, and the next best time to have that conversation is right now. So we do need to really be able to talk about that and, have these conversations now. We are running up to our scheduled time right now, so I see more questions coming in. But as Avi mentioned, we'd be happy to take any of this offline. So keep the feedback coming, please. We see it. We hear you. Avi and I are both very easy to find, and Nexa is very easy to find. We're hungry for these conversations. We want to keep these coming. We are actively speaking with potential partners across the industry to further actionable sustainability. Now we're doing it right now because that's the time for it. It's not, it can't be too far into the future. The state of the world needs this, and the state of the industry is ready for this action. So with that, Avi, I'd like to ask you for any final thoughts as we wrap up here.
No, I think we definitely struck a chord here, and it looks like there is an appetite and a thirst to continue this conversation, which is good news because it's timely. I'm hoping that we can find like-minded, kindred spirits that are willing to do the heavy lift here, because it's what we need is to walk the talk, not just to talk about it. And I always believe that when all is said and done, more is said than done, and I want to get to the doing. And with that, I want to thank everybody, and stay well, stay sustainable, and stay safe.
Yes. Thank you all for that. And let's keep in mind that the time is now. So we welcome your feedback, your thoughts. We're really grateful that you've joined us here today or on the replay later on. This will be available immediately. start these conversations. It's time to go beyond talking the talk. Everything does need to have with the conversation. So let's be sure to start those and then move beyond them into that action. And we'll talk soon. The next team will also see you. We're this week at AMS. We'll be at AMUG next month. We'll be at Rapid right after that. So we look forward to connecting with you all, continuing conversations, and making it happen. So, as Avi said, stay safe, stay sustainable, and let's get there together. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we will keep this going.